Okay, so let's talk about Karl Marx. You just say the name, and wow, you get some strong reactions, right? For some people, he was this visionary genius who pulled back the curtain on capitalism. For others, he's the guy whose ideas led to some truly terrible, oppressive regimes. Either way, you can't deny it. His thinking literally ignited revolutions and completely reshaped the world we're all living in today. So you gotta wonder, right? Who was the actual man behind the whole ism? I mean, behind all the huge theories and the massive political movements, there was just a guy. A philosopher, sure, but also a journalist and a full-blown revolutionary. So in this explainer, we're gonna dig into his life, break down his biggest ideas, and try to unravel his really complicated legacy to see just how he became this, well, this monumental figure in history. So, let's get into it. From rebel student to radical. You know, it makes you think. How does someone even become a revolutionary? For Marx, it wasn't like he just woke up one day and decided to overthrow the government. No, his journey was forged way earlier, in his youth, through his university days, and especially in his constant, and I mean constant, run-ins with the authorities. And man, his journey was a fast one. He's born in 1818, and by the time he hits university in Bonn, he's this rowdy student joining clubs, getting into trouble. But the real game changer was when he transferred to the University of Berlin. That's where he fell in with a group called the Young Hegelians, and these guys were radical. They questioned absolutely everything about religion, politics, you name it. And just a few years later, bam, by 1842, he's taken all that fire and poured it into journalism. He's ready to take on the world. And check this out. This is a very different Marx from the old gray-bearded icon we always see, right? This is the young guy, the student. You can just see the intensity there. This is when that critical mind of his really started to sharpen, when he began to poke holes in all the big ideas of his time, politics, religion, philosophy, all of it. And yeah, that critical mind, it got him into a ton of trouble. His writing was so sharp, so critical, that the Prussian government literally shut his newspaper down. He had to get out of there, so he fled, first to Paris, then to Brussels. He basically became a political exile. You have to understand, his ideas weren't just academic. They were seen as a direct threat to the powers that be, and he spent a huge chunk of his life on the run because of it. But then, in Paris, something huge happens. In 1844, he meets a guy named Friedrich Engels, and this is a crucial moment. Engels was the son of a rich factory owner, so he'd seen with his own eyes just how brutal life was for the working class in industrial England. This meeting, it was the spark for one of the most important intellectual partnerships in history. These two were going to be collaborators for life. And that powerful partnership was about to produce their most famous work ever. The year is 1848. You have to picture it. Europe is basically a powder keg of social unrest just waiting to explode. And Marx and Engels, they're about to strike the match. Okay, so what happened was this group called the Communist League hired them to write a political pamphlet. The job was pretty straightforward. Just lay out what the League believed in, make their goals crystal clear for everyone to see. And what they came up with was this short but absolutely explosive document, the Communist Manifesto. And the pamphlet kicks off with this incredibly powerful line that basically sums up his entire way of seeing the world. For Marx, history isn't about kings or queens or big ideas. Nope. He said it's all driven by one thing, a constant, simmering conflict between economic classes. It's always been the oppressors versus the oppressed, masters and slaves, and in his day, it was the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And the timing here is just wild. I mean, right as the manifesto comes out, boom, revolutions start popping off all across Europe. Now, did the pamphlet cause them? No, not directly, but it perfectly captured the revolutionary vibe of the time. In the end, though, those revolutions failed, and guess who got blamed? Marx. He's accused of sedition again, has to flee, and this time he ends up in London, where he'll stay for good. So now he's in London, and this is where he really hunkers down and starts his life's work. He shifts gears a bit. He moves on from writing these fiery pamphlets to doing this incredibly deep, systematic breakdown of the engine that drove the modern world, capitalism. And right at the core of his whole analysis is this fundamental split. Marx says capitalist society is basically broken into two main, opposing teams. First, you've got the bourgeoisie. These are the owners, right? They own the factories, the land, all the capital, the stuff you need to make things. And on the other side, you have the proletariat. That's the working class. They don't own any of that stuff. The only thing they have to sell is their own labor, which they have to trade for a wage just to get by. And Marx argued that this whole system wasn't just unfair, it was deeply dehumanizing. He had a word for it: alienation. Think about it. Workers are completely disconnected from the things they make. They're stuck doing these boring, repetitive tasks that just kill any sense of creativity. And they're even forced to compete against each other. For Marx, this wasn't just about money, it was a deep spiritual problem. So where does the profit come from in all this? Well, Marx had a concept for that too: surplus value. Here's the basic idea, and it's pretty clever. Let's say a worker makes enough stuff in, say, 4 hours to cover the cost of their daily wage. But do they go home? Nope. They have to work a full 8-hour day. So the value they create in those extra 4 hours, that's the surplus value. It's essentially unpaid labor, and Marx argued that this is the real source of all profit for the capitalist. And all of these incredible ideas, all this analysis, it all came together in his magnum opus, Das Kapital, or just Capital. This thing was published in 1867, and it was the result of years and years of hardcore research he did, mostly tucked away in the British Museum. This was his giant attempt to lay out the laws of motion of capitalism, to show everyone exactly how the system ticked, from the inside out. But here's the thing. Marx wasn't just trying to describe capitalism. He was trying to predict its future. He genuinely believed he had cracked the code of history itself. He saw it all moving in one particular direction, heading towards one final, unavoidable conclusion. The way he saw it, history moves in these clear stages. Every economic system, whether it's feudalism or capitalism, contains the seeds of its own downfall. So just like the bourgeoisie rose up and kicked out the old feudal lords, he argued that it was absolutely inevitable that the proletariat would one day rise up and do the same thing to the bourgeoisie. And this quote from the manifesto just nails that idea perfectly. In his mind, capitalism's own success is what dooms it. Think about it. By packing all these workers together in factories and cities, the system accidentally creates and organizes the very group of people who will eventually tear it all down. For Marx, the revolution wasn't just a maybe, it was a historical certainty. Okay, so what happened with that big prediction? Well, the worldwide revolution that Marx saw coming definitely didn't happen while he was alive. But after he died, his ideas took on a life of their own. I mean, they shook the entire world in ways he probably never, ever could have imagined. When Marx died in London in 1883, he was technically a stateless person. His funeral was tiny, like maybe a dozen people showed up. It's crazy to think about, because at that moment, he was a pretty obscure figure. He was nowhere near the global icon he was about to become. But then the 20th century hits, and his ideas just explode. I mean, they go global. Revolutions in his name create these massive communist states that, at one point, covered a huge chunk of the planet. We're talking the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, Vietnam. This map from 1983 really gives you a sense of just how massive that influence was. And it goes way beyond just politics. His influence on how we think is just immense. Today, he's seen as one of the founding fathers of modern sociology. His ideas about class, power, ideology, and conflict, they're basically essential tools for anyone trying to understand society. His work is still sparking debates and inspiring new ideas in economics, philosophy, history, even in art and literature. And that brings us to the famous line carved on his tomb. It really sums up his whole mission in life, you know? Marx wasn't interested in just sitting around thinking up abstract theories. He believed the whole point of understanding the world was so you could actually go out and change it. So that leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? Who was Karl Marx, really? Was he this brilliant analyst who fearlessly exposed the deep, dark flaws of capitalism? Or was he a flawed prophet whose ideas ended up inspiring some of the most brutal regimes of the 20th century? You know, more than 100 years after his death, his legacy is just as polarizing as ever, and it's up to us to keep grappling with that question.